What's up everybody, and welcome to a new video. And in this video we're going to go over my notes for modules and packages in Python. And here we're going to first cover some definitions. Namely, a module is a single Python file that contains function definitions, class definitions, and or variables. And these functions, classes or variables can then be accessed via dot notation. And then a package and a library is then simply a collection of modules, i.e. it's a folder with Python files and or subfolders. And they in turn can also then be accessed via dot notation. Okay, so this is how I define modules and packages. Then the next note is about some use cases of modules and packages. And here the first one that I want to cover is a personal use. Namely, when you do a bigger project, then you most likely will have a lot of functions and or classes. And this will then result in a huge file. So this then could look something like this here, where you then have a file called project.py, and then at the beginning of this file you have a lot of function definitions and or class definitions, and then here only at the end of the file you have the code for the actual program. So then, to make the code more structured, what you can do is you can put the functions or classes into separate files and then import them into your main file, which then only contains the code for the actual program. So this then could look something like this here. So here we have then this file called functions.py. So this then only contains the function definitions. Then here we have a file called classes.py, which then only contains the class definitions. And then here we have project.py, which contains the code for the actual program. And here you simply at the beginning of this file, you import the functions from this file and the classes from this file. So this is how you can structure a code. And an additional benefit of that is then that you could then also reuse the functions or classes in other projects. So you couldn't just use here these functions, for example, in this project, but maybe also in another one. Okay, so that is then the first use case here that I wanted to cover. And then the next use case is sharing code with other people. And here you can either share your own code with other people, for example, by providing it as open source, or probably more important, what you also can do is you can use the code that other people have written, i.e. use here the standard library or third-party packages, which we will talk about later in this video. Okay, so those are the two use cases here that I wanted to cover. Then the next note is about import statements. And here the available keywords are as follows. Namely, we have import, as, and from. So let's start here with the import statement or keyword. And here let's first look at how we can import a module. So therefore I've prepared here this module. So this is simply called myModule.py, and it contains here a function, a class, and then a variable. So now let's import that. And since that file here is in the same directory as this notebook here, we can simply say here import myModule. So now let's call here this function. So therefore we're going to say here myModule.function. And if I run this, then you can see that it prints out here some function. Then now let's create here an instance of this class. So therefore we're going to say instance equals myModule.myClass. And now if I run this, then you can see it prints out here some class. And then let's lastly also print out here this variable. So therefore then we say myModule.variable. So if I run this, then you can see it prints out here some variable. So this is how we can import a module. So now let's see how we can import a package. So therefore I've prepared here this package. So here in this package we have here this file called functions, which looks like this here. So here we have functions 1 and 2. And then also in this package, we have here this subfolder called subpackage. And here we have this file called helper functions. So let's also open that. So here we have helper functions 1 and 2. So now let's first here call this function 1. So therefore, let's first import that package. So we're going to say import my package. And then now let's run here this function 1. So we're going to say my package, and then here dot, and if I invoke IntelliSense, then you can see what is available. So functions and the subpackage. So we want the functions file, and from that we want then to have function 1. So if I run this, then you can see that we get here some function. So now let's run here a function from this helper functions.py file. So therefore then we simply say my package, and then here again IntelliSense. Now we get to the sub package. Then here we want the helper functions, and then here we want to call helper function 1. So if I run this, then you can see that it prints here some helper functions. So this is how you can import a module or a package. Then the next keyword is called as, and with that you can create an alias. So for example, to show that, instead of saying here import my module, what we also can do is import my module as mm. And in this case then we don't have to here spell out in all these places my module, but we can simply say mm. So now then if I run this here again, then you can see that it also works. So that is the as keyword. And then the last keyword is here called from, and with that you can import individual elements from modules or packages. So for example, let's say we don't want to import here this entire module, but we only want to import here this function. So therefore then you can use the from keyword. So to do that, what you would do is from my module import function. So now if I do it like this, then I can run the function like this. So here again, it prints out some function. So those are then the available keywords. So now let's go over these side notes here. And the first is about using all those three keywords here together. So to show that, what we also could do here is to say from my module import function as f. And then here we simply need to call this function with f. So then here it also prints out some function. So that's first side note. And then the second side note is about using dot notation within the import statement. So to show that, let's say that we want to import here this helper functions.py file. And this was here, if you remember it, in this my package folder. Then here we have the sub package, and then here are those helper functions. So now let's import them with dot notation. So therefore then we would say here from my package dot sub package import the helper functions, and here we can also say, for example, shf, and then here we have then available all those helper functions. So let's call your helper function 1 again, and then if I run this, then it prints out some helper function again. Okay, so those are those side notes, and with that now we've covered here all my notes with respect to the available keywords. So now let's get to this side note here, which is about the wildcard import. So let me quickly show you how that works. Namely, what you also can say here is from my module import, and then here put in the star. So what this does is now it imported everything from my module. So now we don't have to say here, for example, my module.function, but instead we can simply say here function, and then that is available, and this class here is also available. So if I say here my class, then you can see that it prints here some class, and also this variable is also available. So if I say a variable, then it prints here some variable. So that is how this wildcard import works. However, according to, for example, pep8, which we will cover here in a later video, according to that, this is not recommended because in contrast to importing the module, you don't know where functions, classes, or variables are coming from. So for example, if I just regularly import here the module, so if I say here import my module, and then call here this function, so my module, and then dot function, then here in this case, you know that this function here is from my module. However, here with this function, you don't really know where it is coming from. So that's the first reason why it's not recommended to use the wildcard import. The second one is that you could accidentally overwrite imported functions, classes, or variables. So for example, let's say here with our wildcard import, we then also create a new function, and we also call this here function. So let's here make simply a print statement that says some other function. So then now if I call this function, then now we have here overwritten this previous function. And this can't happen with this approach where I just import my module. Namely, if I also copy here then this function and then here run this code again, Then if I run here the function, then it prints out some other function. However, we haven't overwritten our function from the module, because we can still say here my module and then dot function. And then here it still prints out some function. So it's the second reason. And then lastly, additionally, it is also less convenient to use code completion features with this wildcard import here. So for example, when we use this kind of import here, what you can do is to say my module and then dot, and then here I can invoke IntelliSense, and then here I can see everything that is available within that module. And this is not possible with this wildcard approach. Okay, so those are my notes with the wildcard, and with that then here we've covered the side note, and with that then we've covered all my notes with respect to import statements. Then the next note is about the Python standard library. Namely, Python comes with a lot of modules or packages already pre-installed, i.e. you can immediately import them. And some examples of that are the random module, which is for generating pseudo-random numbers, the OS module, which is for interacting with the operating system, or the URL lib module for interacting with websites. So let's look at an example here with this random module. So therefore, let's simply say here import random. And now if I say here random dot and then invoke here IntelliSense, then I can see everything that is available within this module. So let's, for example, use here this randint function with which we can create a random integer. So let's create one between 1 and 10. So now if I run this, then we get here a 6. And if I run it again, then now we get here a 2. So that is the random module. And then here I also have a side note, namely when making an import statement, Python checks for the respective module or a package in a number of different directories. And that's also the reason why I can here import this random module. Even the file for this module is not in the same directory as, for example, here this Jupyter notebook. And if you want to know what those different directories are, then you can check out here this link. Okay, so that's a side note. And with that now we've covered here all my notes with respect to the Python standard library. And then the last note is about third-party packages. Namely, third-party packages are not already pre-installed, i.e. you need to install them first before you can import them. And some examples are as follows. So pandas, for example, for manipulating data, matplotlib for creating plots, or scikit-learn for doing some machine learning. So let's look at an example here with pandas. So therefore, you obviously need to first install it, and I've already done that. So therefore, I can then say here, for example, import pandas as pd. And then here I've prepared some code snippet where I create here a pandas data frame. So to see that, let's simply print out here this variable df. So this is then here what this data frame looks like. Okay, so with that now, we've covered here all my notes with respect to third-party packages. And with that, then we've covered all my notes with respect to modules and packages in Python. So we've reached the end of this video. And then in the next video, we will go over my notes for error handling in Python. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.